works, and throw a little enhanced contractility by throwing a little epinephrine on top of the heart. You're there. The much harder one to visualize is how can you enhance the venous return to keep up with this if you've got this pressure of 7 millimeters of mercury and the venules at rest. So here's our resting curve that we just said, the trap of rest. We can't get out. We can't get out. This curve here is a moderate load of exercise. So these, I put a lot of work in getting these on the same scale. So notice 5, 5. So let's do the two curves and see what's happened. I told you the cardiac outward curve is the easiest. Instead of being at 0 for exercise, oh, this is the same. You go to 3 millimeters of mercury of stretch, and the heart, and then you throw a little. So just the pressure change alone will take you on this curve to halfway to where you want to go. If you just increase the pressure from 0-ish to here, boom. So the heart is not optimized in stretch at rest. Then throw a little epinephrine on it, you're there. That was a piece of cake. The more mystical part, which we will undo in the next 3 slides, understand is, look what's happened to venous return. Remember before, if you went up in venous, in right atrial pressure to 3, you would have cut your venous return in half. In this situation, the venous return is now way the heck up here. Use the new method you learned that if we go down to the x-intercept, what is this telling you the pressure in the peripheral veins has become? It's 3 times resting. So something has pressurized the snot out of the peripheral veins. Okay? That's what's allowing us to escape the box of rest is you need a tidal wave of blood coming up. Remember I told you that what? 75, 80% of your total blood volume is just sitting kind of slowly dribbling through your veins. If you want to double your cardiac output, you need to get that out of the veins. It needs to get a motive to go home. Motive force being pressure. Right? So, the next 2 slides talk about how we did that. How do we pressurize the veins? The biggest and easiest one that Jerome introduced 2 lectures ago. He remembered some basic stuff he'd been taught in other classes. And that when the muscles begin to contract, they begin to pressurize these literally thousands of small chambers. My little joke term for them, don't use these with other scientists. Eso es las ventriculitos. These are the little ventricles. Am I making sense? That if the ventricle here is pressurizing the blood at super high pressures to go out, you can get a similar total level of flow by having thousands of these pressurizing up to 20 millimeters of mercury. And you can get quite an effective. Another thing about why this is so important is how much blood becomes pressurized, say, in a walk versus rowing really hard. Think about the volume of muscle activated. So this pressurization is perfectly proportionate on an anatomic basis to how much muscle you activate. Show you one more thing. The harder you work, a walk, you might be pressurizing this to 15. A heavy run, you pressurize it up to 25. The intensity of the contraction automatically enhances. Isn't that cool? And it's all mechanical. It's built in, right? All you have to do is start the contraction, and this happens. There's 2 other methods, or 2 other mechanisms. That one is by far the biggest one. There's 2 other things that happen. When you look at a circulation, and we already talked about the swamp and the metal tube, those descriptions can be a low compliance arterial circulation. Resting muscle has nice stiff determinants. The saggy circulations are the skin and the GI tract. They tend to have very distensible terminal arterioles and a big, what did you call that web, the fenestra of the reticulum of capillaries? Anyway, huge amount of ability to store volume. One way to further enhance the venous return, don't pump blood into swamps. Just turn it off. And so if you were to, here we have VC standing for vasoconstriction. If you turn off the flow to the gut and you turn off the flow to the skin, all of that blood that was sort of lingering in the veins automatically drains out and ups the stretch on the heart and the central circulation. So that's your second effect, and I'll show you how the brain institutes that. So turn off saggy circulations and get it there. That's this method. Many people like to teach you at the undergraduate level. Most profs will say, oh, the reason you get enhanced venous return is venoconstriction. It is a small player. Remember, if you're trying to recruit, if you're trying to change flow, a 15% constriction changes flow. If you're trying to recruit volume, if you want 50% of the volume in the thing, you've got to constrict it by 50%. Veins don't have that much smooth muscle. They have less than arterioles. So venoconstriction is a minor player. I just drew you a picture here. The veins do not have thick musculature in the tunica media, and they do not have nearly the nervous innervation. The two exceptions to that are the gut and the skin have a little bit of smooth muscle in their veins. And I'll show you that. You can read that. So, what we're going to do now is go through the onset of exercise for the next 20 minutes. 25. And there's a series of steps that happen. Just like with muscle recruitment, these steps may be, milliseconds apart. But I'm going to break them out so you can see them. So when you start exercise, the first thing you do is so you got the venous muscle pump is enhancing venous return, as well as the restriction of blood flow to the skin and the gut. Well, how are we restricting blood flow to the skin and the gut? That's going to be the sympathetic nervous system turned through alpha receptors causes vasoconstriction. I'll show you that in 2 slides. But when we start exercise, and this will make you unhappy, but be brave, I don't lie to you, I tell you the complex truth. That y-axis here is the temperature of the skin of the back. This is in a lab. The person is using a rowing ergometer and working at about 95% of VO2 max. They're doing a 5-minute set, which is what, like a 3,000 piece? Do you have anyone who pulls? Something. So the skin of the back in this condition, without airflow and all, it's really reflecting the blood arriving to the skin. That's what's heating it up, right? It's 37 is core temperature. At rest, got 34. There's a 3-degree step down. The back is perfused and warm. Notice you start the exercise right here. You see what happens to the blood flow to the back? It plummets. What I like about this, these were repeats. You stop the work and immediately the back reperfuses. You wait 5 minutes, you do another piece, immediately the blood flow plummets. So there is a global, remember the sympathetic nervous system cannot say, I am going to restrict flow to Song's right ear and enhance flow to the left. It doesn't do that. It's global. So everything at the start of exercise shuts down. Sympathetic nervous system is mass discharge. When you get specific effects, it's because of the adrenergic receptors. What kind of receptor do you have? And then we're going to see that local overrides are really important, that the tissue itself can throw out metabolites that might change the opinion of the smooth muscle cells. So, okay, we're going to remember these. So that alpha constrictor, I always like to think of that alpha as like a garrote. For you guys who don't know what a garrote is, not all garrotes. When you wrap a rope around someone's neck and pull, the technical term for that is garrote. And so think of that loop that's going to help you remember. That loop is the choke. When you stimulate alpha-1 receptors, you get smooth muscle constriction in the vessels. They help choke off flow. Makes you wonder what my childhood was like, doesn't it? Jim, let go of your boyfriend. Then there's two forms of beta receptor. And remember, all of these are epinephrine receptors, norepinephrine, epinephrine receptors. Alpha receptor. The beta receptor, from now on, when you say beta 1, I want you to think of this loop as a heart. Because beta 1 serves our favorite organ, the heart. Beta 1 receptors, they actually stimulate the heart to faster heart rates and stronger contractility. So when you start exercising, your heart rate goes up and your systolic blood pressure goes up. That's almost all beta 1 activity. Okay? Now, evermore for beta 2, I want you to distort that word 2 and say beta tubes, because that's going to help you remember where beta tubes activate. They work inside tubes. Now notice I didn't say vessels, I said tubes. That's going to help you remember that it creates vasodilation, the opposite effect of an alpha, in two different tubes, the air-filled tubes of the lung, right? It'd be nice to have dilated lungs as you start to exercise. True that. And in the coronary arteries, because the one place where you would not like to have a global vasoconstriction would, would be in the arteries feeding your heart. So these two kind of offset one another in the heart based on the density of receptors. You track all that? So watch, just knowing that, I guess I have to mention this briefly. It is interesting, or important to notice that the alpha receptors, the reason all of you are conscious, for those of you who are still awake, all of you are conscious in the chair. If you didn't have alpha 1 constriction, keeping the vessels down in your limbs, your dependent limb, all the blood would wind up there. This is part of our gravity defense that we're talking about. So at rest, there's alpha 1 activity keeping the vascular resistance high. And this is just a proof of that. This is a person lying on a table, and they're about to have a surgical procedure. And so we're just taking advantage of the fact that they're headed off for surgery for their knee or something. So you put in a spinal anesthetic. Here's their arterial pressure. It should be about 95. It's up at 100 because they're anxious about their surgery. You put a tube in their back and put their thoracolumbar spinal cord to sleep, which both stops the afferent traffic, which causes pain, but it also turns off the sympathetic nervous system. Right? So notice what happens to their mean arterial pressure. All the alpha 1s relax when you stop the tonic or constant traffic to the alpha 1. Your sympathetic nervous system is always dribbling a little bit of epinephrine, actually norepinephrine, on your peripheral alpha 1 receptor. Does that make sense? Now, just to prove that what was causing this drop was a dilation due to lack of epinephrine, they inject into the patient's IV before they go off to surgery a little norepinephrine. Is this what you're missing in your circulation? Of course, it clears quickly and they come back down here and then off to surgery. That makes sense? So the reason you're awake right now is a little bit of alpha 1 tonic stimulation from your sympathetic nervous system. So, I had a picture. Here's your thoracolumbar nervous system. So if you put a needle in the back and then dribbled lidocaine around all these, stuff would happen. So let's go, okay. I'm gonna go through this. I left my notes at home, but I think I can do it. There's about 3 or 4 steps as we reinvent the circulation. You ready? So at rest, 5 liters of venous return leads to 5 liters of cardiac output, and it's hecka hard to change that. We start exercise. Remember, exercise starts in the muscle. If you wanted, those of you who can draw with your styluses, draw some skeletal muscle around this. And so the instant that exercise starts and the skeletal muscle starts smooshing the veins inside, what happens to venous return? In the instant the contractions start, venous return starts going up in proportion to the amount and the intensity of muscle recruiting. Then the second thing that happens, or coincident with the onset of exercise, here's a central command. Remember, we talked about central command. It doesn't use feedback. It just gives the orders. And so when your brain starts, it says start 40% of the muscle mass running, there, between the motor cortex and the cardiorespiratory regulatory center, there's communicating neurons that say, we are starting 40% of the muscle mass, cut off blood flow to the entire body. Don't panic, I know we've got to fix that, but it's only for a few milliseconds. So all of these spigots here, you have a generalized vasoconstriction. You just shut it all down. And Felipe is very upset by this, and he should be. So by turning this off, what is the main effect for the large amounts of blood contained in the gut and in the skin? It starts to drain out, and you have a second reason that venous return is going up. You ready? And then a third reason is these little red, I enhanced, Loring Rowell had put smooth muscle here because he's a smart guy, and I just turned it red so you can see it. A final thing that the central command is doing, it's actually creating venoconstriction to further wring this out. All right? Now, so that's what's happening in the peripheral circulation, which means within about 5 seconds of the onset of exercise, a tidal wave of blood is arriving at the heart. There's another central command. At exactly the same instant that the brain started the muscles going, you started to throw a bunch of norepinephrine upon the nerve terminals that land on the heart, on the beta-1 receptors. So what happens to heart rate and contractility? It goes up, right? Which is really convenient because a tidal wave of blood is arriving at the heart. Start to see that? Okay. Good for you. Oh, you're upset that we cut off all blood flow. I'm about overrides. It turns out that the products of metabolism let's see, what dribbles out into, not lactate itself. Lactate is not a vasodilator. Protons are a weak vasodilator. Potassium is a very strong vasodilator. Inorganic phosphate, we don't know exactly which balance of ions is doing this, but the stuff that pours out of a contracting muscle turns out to be a smooth muscle relaxant. So the initial vasoconstriction that the brain institutes is almost immediately overridden in the active muscle. Got that? By what we call metabolic vasodilators. Does everyone see why that's so cool? So important? If you're playing tennis, right? Are you the tennis player? Who's the tennis player? Oh, Kate is the tennis player. If Kate is playing tennis, she would like a lot of blood flow to her right arm. She doesn't need a lot of blood flow to her left arm. So this global vasoconstriction is only overridden in the muscles that actually need nourishment. It's sort of like a mom who locks up all the cupboards in her kitchen and says, oh, the hungry ones will break in, they'll figure it out. Metabolic. Is this okay? I'm teaching this at the graduate level. I'm sorry, but I have to tell you the truth. So let's go through this about what happens. The brain is, at the start of exercise, has a global spreading of norepinephrine through all terminals. When that global epinephrine hits the alpha-1 receptors of the inactive muscle, or of the splanchnics, splanknos is Greek for guts, of the gut circulation. When you hit the alpha-1s, what happens to blood flow to these organs? With the onset of exercise. Turns off, stays off. Got it? When the norepinephrine hits the beta-1 receptors of the sinoatrial node or the muscle itself, what happens to rate and contractility? In the beta-2 receptors, which are unusually rich in the coronary arteries, what happens when the beta-2 receptors get norepinephrine? They dilate. Okay? Now, here's the last thing I told you. In the muscle that's actually actively working, In the first milliseconds of activity, norepinephrine stimulates alpha-1s and creates a vasoconstriction. Does that continue? No. The vasodilatory metabolites that are pouring out of the muscle rapidly override, a metabolic vasodilatory override, and it reestablishes blood flow to exactly those muscles that are working in proportion to how hard they are working. It's so freaking cool. So, I can tell I'm going to get way behind. Where's my cursor? Oh, there it is. Okay, come. I hate when we do that. By way of review, just to prove to you that I know whereof I speak, this is a measurement of the blood flow to the gut and to the kidney. So this is splanchnic blood flow and renal blood flow. I think I labeled that. Yeah, splanchnic, gut and kidney blood flow. Graphed against exercise intensity. Most of you guys, when you work out, are in this range. Yeah, heart rates. Most of you have cut your blood flow in half to your guts and your kidney if you're training at moderate level. You ever notice how you don't pee very promptly after a good workout? What does come out is all concentrated. We'll talk about that, but half the issue is you cease to perfuse your kidney. You can't make urine out of nothing. That make sense? Okay. And notice this is graphed against the signal that's creating this drop-off, which is the change in norepinephrine during exercise. Okay? So, has anyone ever noticed that when you work at very high intensity, your gastrointestinal tract has opinions? That for some people it's sort of out this end, and for other people it's out that end, but in general, your GI tract is sort of unwilling to process large amounts of calories. Has anyone noticed this? Yeah. So you now understand this much better, that Steve is actually at national level 500 meter. He was running his first marathon, and someone had told him you have to put calories in, and that's true in a marathon, but he clearly overdid it, and so it's coming back out on the basis of there's no way to absorb. That's why metering in a small amount of glucose-rich material after the first hour is useful, but large amounts backfire, literally backfire. They become ammunition. Sorry, I ruined your breakfast. All right. Here's a review for you that you can look at on your own. It's a wonderful review. Those are the steps I was trying to capture. Oh, good for me. I should have just learned. And so when we come back, hang on. Let's see how far we can. Oh, perfect. I know where we're going to go. So let me do like 4 more slides. And we'll start here. So in terms of heart rate, I've told you heart rate is a follower, and it's under the control of the autonomic nervous system. At rest, the heart rate, as I said, is hobbled by the sympathetic nervous system. It's slowed down, by the parasympathetic nervous system. Acetylcholine is being dribbled on your heart. Now, if you did the Aztec thing, if you opened up someone's chest and ripped out their heart, and this detaches all the nerves, you have to do it real sneaky so you don't get a big epinephrine surge. Does anyone know what the natural rate of the sinoatrial node is? If you put it in a petri dish and make it happy? Not 60. No. Remember I told you it's being held down by the parasympathetic. If you remove all the nervous 100. 95. Plus or minus 5. So it's really quite high. The natural rate of your heart. We'll get into this. Another way to say this is, you know, when you do a heart transplant, you take a heart from the dead person and put it in the other person. There is no way to hook up the autonomic nerves. It just can't happen. So tell me the heart rate, the resting heart rate of every heart transplant patient I've ever met. 95. Unless they have a pacemaker placed in to alter that. 95. So when we first start to exercise, notice this is graphed against exercise. When we first start to exercise, the first change, when you get up and walk 5 minutes from now to your next class, the first change that brings your heart rate up from 60 to about 100 is parasympathetic withdrawal. You take the inhibitor off the natural. See how the heart, I keep saying the heart is not meant to rest. There's all this stuff holding the circulatory system back. Our natural state is to be up and wiggling. Does that make any sense? Okay, now once you get to a heart rate, if you get to a heart rate of 100 as you walk to your next class, and then you discover you're late because Dr. Shafrath just kept nattering on, how are you going to elevate it even higher to get you some giddy up so you wind up in the, what will you use? You'll use norepinephrine to drive it up higher. Your natural rate is right about there. The unnervous controlled rate of the sinoatrial node is about 90 plus 1. Okay? Okay? I'm going to skip this for now. I think I'll skip these two because I want to get to the end. Maybe. Oh, I will say, during exercise, with this tidal wave of blood coming back to the heart is going to fill more. So that would be preload. Let's see if we can prove that. These are the ventricular volume at end diastole, so this is maximal filling. This is the end systolic volume after the heart is fully empty. So what does this white opening represent? The Stokes volume. So I'm telling you that these are workloads here. That's rest, first workload, second workload, peak. Notice that the heart immediately fills more. So that's preload. You're giving it the stretch it needs to optimize function. More venous return. Then notice, tell me again what's going to happen with all the beta-1 stimulation to the heart. Is it going to contract weaker against this large fluid volume? No, it's going to hammer on it. And so you actually notice it fills more and yet empties more as well. What does that mean? Without doing the math, what does that mean about ejection fraction during exercise? Goes up, right? The amount, the fraction ejected goes way up. It'd be fun if you want to calculate those. This one I think goes up to 83% from a resting value of 60. Good. Last slide and we'll quit. I know I'm working you hard, but so am I. So a lot of the things I've been talking about are simply how do we get from a 5-liter cardiac output up to a 25-liter cardiac output? And the answer is you need more venous return, and then you have to amp up the heart by stretch and sympathetic stimulation. Now the second issue is if you don't change the resistances in the circulation, this 25%, if it's equally distributed in the same way it was at rest, well, you'd be pumping 5 liters through the kidneys, and you'd be pumping 4 liters through your brain, neither of which need those levels of flow, and would probably, your head at least, would explode. Blood would come out your eyes. So this selective vasoconstriction, this generalized vasoconstriction that's being overridden in specific organs which are metabolically active, look what it does. So at rest, 1 liter through the gut, 1 liter through the kidneys, about 1 liter through all of your resting muscle, almost a liter through your brain. You start exercise. The brain undergoes autoregulation, and it takes exactly, it'd be fun, take 3.5 and multiply it by 0.03.5, multiply it. You'll find the brain perfectly maintains its blood flow. What has happened to the gut? Total flow is cut in half. What has happened to the kidney? Total flow is cut in half. Again, take that 0.02 and multiply it by that, and you get the absolute flow. Then what are we doing with all this? Where is all that flow going? A huge redistribution. So I showed you this slide before, but it's a perfect way to end. Remember, this is a glucose that has fluorine substituted in, an isotopic fluorine in one of the carbons. So it's not metabolized, but it is taken up. And I showed it to show where is blood. You can also use this for blood flow, right? Because the glucose doesn't get to the cells unless the blood flows there. That make sense? So here's the patient at rest, a liter to the brain, a liter to the guts, a liter to the kidneys. That are these shadows doing. Now we're going to start exercise. Patient is sent out, this is in Hokkaido, Japan, sent out to run around the hilly hospital for 30 minutes, and then they come back in. Notice the gut is turned off. Something you might not have noticed before, see this lovely blush on the cheeks and the chest? That's skin blood flow. Cool day in Hokkaido. No blood flow. Right? I told you the skin shuts off. This will come back on. Kate's cheeks remind me of that. That if it's a warm day and you make enough metabolic heat, the nervous system will open up skin blood flow again. You can tell it was a cool day in Hokkaido. The blood flow in the skin stayed off. Notice the kidneys have completely disappeared. And where's all the blood flow going? The heart is now clearly visible, including the left atrium. And, oh, you can tell how I know it's hilly? Hilly in Hokkaido, the quads and the calves are turned on like fire. Make sense? Yay! Yes, ma'am. Sir. Yes, ma'am. Sir, baby.
If you maintain blood flow to the brain, how can you get lightheaded and can't think toward the end of a hard workout?
That's the topic I didn't get to, and we'll take it up on Tuesday.
Okay.
Perfect, Moses.